I found out my brothers earned twice as much while doing far less than I did at our family company. When I questioned HR, my father looked me in the eye and said, "They are men, and you just waste money." I quit on the spot and he laughed, asking, "Who is going to hire you?" So I started my own competing company and took all the clients with me. Before I tell you how I brought my father's empire to its knees, let me know where you are watching from in the comments. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to prove your worth to the people who should have valued you the most. My name is Nia, and I am 32 years old living in Atlanta. For the last 5 years, I have been the unseen engine keeping Peyton Logistics running, while my father Desmond played the role of the visionary CEO. It was a Tuesday morning, and the office was in absolute chaos. A shipment of frozen seafood from Savannah was stuck at customs because my younger brother Jamal had forgotten to file the proper FDA paperwork again. I had two phones pressed to my ears trying to negotiate with a customs officer while simultaneously calming down a furious client who was threatening to sue us for breach of contract. I looked through the glass walls of the executive suite and felt my blood boil. While I was putting out fires that could bankrupt us, my brothers Marcus and Jamal were lounging on the leather sofas, playing a virtual golf simulator my father had installed last month. They were laughing high-fiving each other and drinking scotch at 10 in the morning. Marcus held the title of Director of Strategy, but the only strategy he had developed in 3 years was how to delegate his work to me. Jamal was supposed to be the operations manager, but he could not even manage to show up on time, let alone manage a supply chain. I needed the updated manifest from the printer to clear the shipment, so I slammed the receiver down and sprinted across the office. The central printer was humming, spitting out a thick stack of documents. I grabbed the pile, assuming it was the shipping logs I had sent moments ago. It was not. It was a document titled Executive Compensation Review, Fiscal Year 2024. My heart hammered against my ribs as I realized the HR director must have sent it to the wrong queue. I knew I should not look, but I could not stop myself. My eyes scanned the rows, and my breath hitched. There it was in black and white. Marcus Peyton Base. Salary $250,000 plus a quarterly bonus of $50,000. Jamal Peyton Base salary $180,000 plus a housing allowance. I frantically flipped the page looking for my name. When I found it, I felt like the floor had dropped out from under me. Nia Peyton Base salary $95,000, no bonus, no housing allowance, no company car. I stared at the paper until the numbers blurred. I handled 80% of the client accounts. I managed the day-to-day operations. I had personally secured the 3 largest contracts in the company's history, including the massive Tech Global deal just last week. Yet here was the proof that in my father's eyes, I was worth less than half of what my lazy, incompetent brothers were paid. The unfairness of it was not just a sting, it was a physical blow. I looked up at the glass office where Marcus was practicing his golf swing, and something inside me snapped. I was done being the good daughter. I gripped the payroll document in my hand, my knuckles turning white, and marched toward the executive suite. I forced myself to look at the breakdown again, because my brain refused to accept the first glance. It was not just the base salary disparity that made me sick, it was the column labeled discretionary perks. Next to Marcus's name was a monthly allowance of $3,000 for country club dues and client networking. I knew for a fact Marcus had not met a client on a golf course in 2 years, he just liked drinking gin and tonics in a polo shirt. Jamal had a fully paid lease for a Range Rover listed under fleet expenses, even though his job required zero travel. Then there was my line item. Under perks, it simply said, NA, not applicable. I felt a cold wave of fury wash over me as the memory of last week hit me like a physical slap. I had walked into my father's office beaming and placed the signed Tech Global contract on his desk, a deal worth $1.2 million annually. I had asked for a modest $5,000 raise to help with my student loans, and he had looked me dead in the eye and sighed, saying, "Money is tight right now, Nia. We all have to tighten our belts for the good of the company." Tighten our belts. I looked back at the paper in my trembling hand. He was paying Marcus $3,000 a month to play golf, while telling me the company could not afford to pay me a fair market wage. The hypocrisy was so blatant, it tasted like bile in my throat. This was not about budget. This was not about experience. This was about the fact that I was a woman, and he believed I would never leave him because I was desperate for his approval. He was wrong. The sadness I had felt moments ago evaporated, replaced by a cold, hard rage that sharpened my vision. I did not care about the shipment stuck at the port anymore. I did not care about the ringing phones or the chaos in the logistics pit. I crumpled the document in my fist and turned on my heel. Mrs. Higgins, the HR director, spotted me from across the room, and her face went pale as she realized what I was holding. She started to stand up, reaching out a hand as if to stop me, but I was already moving. I marched straight toward the double-glass doors of the executive suite. Linda, his longtime secretary, jumped up from her desk, her eyes wide with alarm. "Nia, you cannot go in there," she stammered, blocking my path with her small frame. "He is in a private strategy meeting with your brothers." Strategy meeting? I could hear the clinking of glass and the distinct sound of laughter coming from inside. I did not slow down. "I am the director of operations. Linda," I said, my voice low and dangerous, "and I am making an executive decision to interrupt." I sidestepped her outstretched arm and threw the heavy doors open with enough force that they slammed against the side walls. The room smelled of expensive scotch and vanilla perfume. Desmond sat behind his mahogany desk, a crystal tumbler in his hand, looking like a king on his throne. Marcus was sprawled on the sofa, laughing at something on his phone, while his wife Emily sat perched on the edge of the desk, sipping a glass of white wine, as if this were a cocktail party, and not a place of business at 11 in the morning. The sight of them relaxed, wealthy, and utterly unbothered, while I had been sweating over customs forms, made me shake with rage. I did not say a word. I marched up to the desk and slammed the crumpled payroll document down right in front of my father. The sound cracked like a whip, startling Emily so much she nearly spilled her wine. "Explain this," I demanded, my voice trembling not with fear, but with the effort to keep from screaming. "Explain to me why the director of strategy makes nearly triple my salary when he has not signed a client in 3 years." Desmond did not even blink. He took a slow sip of his drink, picked up the paper, and glanced at it with a bored expression. "You should not have seen this, Nia," he said calmly. "HR has become incredibly sloppy." He looked up at me, his eyes cold and unapologetic. "But since you have let us not make a scene, the numbers are correct." "Correct." I choked out a laugh that sounded more like a bark. "Dad, I run this company. I manage the logistics, the staff, the clients. Marcus plays golf. Jamal plays video games. And you pay them a combined $400,000 while I am scraping by on less than 6 figures. How is that correct?" Desmond set his glass down hard. "Watch your tone. Marcus is a man, Nia. He has a wife. He has responsibilities. He is the future head of this family. It is my duty to ensure he has the resources to lead and provide. You are different. Different how I challenged him. Because I am a woman. Because I actually work. Because you do not have a family to support." Emily chimed in, her voice dripping with that sugar-coated condescension I had come to loathe. She swirled her wine, the massive diamond on her finger catching the light, a diamond bought with the bonus money I had earned. "Let us be honest, Nia. You are single. You live in a condo. What do you even need that much money for? Another pair of shoes. A cat." She laughed, looking at Marcus for approval, and he snickered along with her. "Marcus needs to maintain a certain lifestyle. We have appearances to keep up. You just have yourself." I looked at her, this woman who had never worked a day in her life, lecturing me on the value of my labor. Then I looked at my father, waiting for him to defend me, to tell her to shut up. Instead, he nodded. "She has a point, Nia. Men build legacies. Women support them. Your role here is to support your brothers, not compete with them. You are wasting money we could be investing in the family name. Support my brothers. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Support the men who were currently drinking on the job while I cleaned up their messes. I looked at Desmond, my father, the man I had idolized for 30 years, and for the first time I saw him clearly. He did not see me as his child. He saw me as a servant, a workhorse bred to carry the load so his sons could run free. You really believe that I asked, my voice quiet but steady. You believe that my value is defined solely by my ability to make their lives easier. Desmond shrugged, taking another sip of his scotch. It is the way of the world, Nia. You are overhead, operational expenses. Marcus and Jamal represent the future. They are assets. You cannot expect an asset and an expense to be valued the same way. The last thread of loyalty I held for this family snapped. It was a physical sensation, a sharp pain in my chest, followed by a rush of adrenaline. I did not scream. I did not cry. I reached up and unclipped my security badge, the one that gave me access to the vaults, the server rooms, and the accounts. I placed it gently on the mahogany desk next to the crumpled payroll sheet. Then I dug into my purse. I pulled out the keys to the company sedan, a 5-year-old Ford, while Jamal drove a Range Rover. I placed them on top of the badge. Finally, I took out the company phone, which had been buzzing incessantly in my pocket with client emergencies. I set it down with a click. "What is this?" Desmond asked, his eyes narrowing. "Is this a tantrum?" "It is a budget cut," I said, standing tall. "You said I am a cost, Dad. You said I am wasting money. So I am doing my duty as the director of operations. I am eliminating the unnecessary expense. I quit. Effective immediately." The room went silent. Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth, but I saw the gleam of excitement in her eyes. She wanted me gone. Marcus actually laughed, shaking his head as if I were a child threatening to run away from home. "You cannot quit." Desmond scoffed, leaning back in his chair. "You have a contract. You have responsibilities. Who is going to clear that shipment in Savannah? Who is going to handle the tech global implementation?" "That sounds like a job for your assets," I replied, gesturing to my brothers. "Let the men handle it. They are the investments, after all." I turned and walked toward the door, my heels clicking rhythmically on the hardwood. My hand was on the handle when Desmond's voice stopped me cold, not with an apology, but with a threat. "If you walk out that door, Nia, do not think you can come crawling back when you realize the real world does not care about your feelings. You are a 32-year-old woman with an attitude problem. Who is going to hire you in this town when I tell them you walked out on your own father? You will be starving in 3 months." I looked back over my shoulder one last time. I memorized the scene. The arrogance on his face, the smirk on Emily's lips, the oblivious boredom in Marcus's eyes. "Watch me," I said. I opened the door and stepped out. The noise of the office hit me instantly. Phones ringing, printers whirring, people shouting questions. Linda looked up from her desk, hopeful. "Nia, did you get the approval?" I walked past her without breaking stride. I walked past the panic in the logistics pit, past the unanswered phones, past the life I had built for 5 years. I pushed through the main exit doors into the humid Atlanta air and took the first deep breath I had taken in a decade. I was unemployed. I was alone. But for the first time in my life, I was free. The ride back to the condo was silent. I sat in the back of a generic rideshare, watching the Atlanta skyline blur past the window. The apartment in Midtown was beautiful, a sleek glass box on the 20th floor with floor-to-ceiling windows and a concierge service. My father loved to remind me of it. "A perk of the job," he would say whenever I asked for a raise. "Most girls your age have to have roommates. You live like a queen on the company's dime." I realized now it was never a perk. It was a leash. I walked through the door and the air conditioning hit me cool and sterile. My phone pinged. It was a priority email notification. Not from a client, but from the building management company with a carbon copy sent directly to Desmond Payton. "Dear Ms. Payton," it read. "Per the instruction of the leaseholder, Payton Logistics, your occupancy rights have been terminated, effective immediately. Please vacate the premises by 12:30 p.m. tomorrow to avoid legal action regarding trespassing. Security has been notified. 24 hours. He was not just firing me, he was evicting me. He wanted me on the street before I could even process the loss of my income. It was a tactical nuclear strike designed to induce panic to force me to run back to his office in tears, begging for shelter, willing to accept any humiliation just to keep a roof over my head. I stared at the screen. Instead of panic, a strange, cold clarity washed over me. He thought removing the safety net would make me fall. He did not realize that I had been the one holding the net for him all these years. I did not cry. I did not scream. I walked into the bedroom and pulled my suitcases from the closet. I started packing with military precision. I took only what was mine: my clothes, my laptop, the hard drive containing my personal portfolio. I left the furniture. I left the expensive kitchen gadgets Emily had gifted me for Christmas, usually accompanied by a snide comment about how I should learn to cook since I was not getting any younger. I left the Peyton legacy behind. My phone rang again, vibrating against the marble countertop. The caller ID flashed Jamal. I considered ignoring it, but I needed to hear it. I needed the fuel. "Hello, Jamal," I answered, putting him on speaker while I folded a blazer. "So Dad says you finally snapped." Jamal's voice boomed through the quiet apartment, slurred slightly, likely from the afternoon scotch he was still drinking. "You walked out seriously. Do you know how crazy you look right now?" "I look like someone who just woke up," I replied, placing the blazer into the suitcase. Jamal laughed, a harsh grating sound. "You look like someone who is going to be sleeping on a park bench. Oh wait, you do not have a car to sleep in either. Dad took the keys, right? You have nothing, Nia. No job, no house, no money. You are nobody without us." "I am the person who fixed your customs paperwork this morning," I said, zipping the first suitcase shut. "I hope you took notes, Jamal. The next crisis is all yours." "Don't be stupid," he sneered. "Come back and apologize. If you beg, Dad might let you keep the condo for another month. You can't survive out there. Who is going to hire a 32-year-old assistant with an attitude problem? You need us." "I need you like I need a tumor," I said calmly. I ended the call and blocked his number. Then I blocked Marcus. Then Emily. I stared at my father's contact info for a moment, my thumb hovering over the screen. I decided not to block him. I wanted him to be able to reach me when the regret finally set in. I stood in the center of the living room, surrounded by my packed life. The sun was setting, casting long orange shadows across the floor. I was 32 years old. I was homeless. I was unemployed. I had a family that actively wanted to see me fail. But as I looked around the empty apartment, I realized something that made me smile for the first time that day. The suffocating weight on my chest was gone. The anxiety that had plagued me every Sunday night was gone. The constant need to prove myself to people who were committed to misunderstanding me was gone. I picked up my bags. I did not look back. I walked out the door and into the unknown, feeling lighter than air. 2 days later, my phone rang while I was sitting on the edge of a lumpy mattress in a budget motel off the interstate. It was my mother, Vanessa. Her voice was soft and trembling, the exact tone she used when she wanted to smooth over one of my father's rages. She told me to come home for Sunday dinner. She said we needed to heal as a family, and that my father was willing to listen if I was willing to talk. Against my better judgment, a tiny spark of hope ignited in my chest. I wanted my mother to be on my side. I wanted to believe that she saw the injustice, even if she had been too afraid to speak up in the moment. I drove my rental car to the family estate in Buckhead. The house loomed large and imposing, a brick fortress built on appearances. I walked through the front door expecting a private conversation with my parents. Instead, I walked into an ambush. They were all there, seated around the formal dining table like a tribunal. Desmond sat at the head, looking stoic and aggrieved. Marcus and Jamal were on one side, smirking over plates of roast beef. Emily sat next to Marcus, looking bored and picking at a salad. My mother ushered me to a chair opposite my father, the seat of the accused. The air in the room was so thick with tension it felt suffocating. I had barely sat down before my mother burst into tears. She did not ask how I was doing or where I was sleeping. She looked at me with a face full of disappointment and asked, "How could you be so selfish, Nia? Your father has high blood pressure. Do you want to put him in an early grave over money?" I stared at her, stunned. "Selfish?" I asked. "Mom, I found out they were paying me less than half of what Jamal makes to do twice the work. I was not trying to hurt Dad. I was trying to get paid for my labor." "Money is not everything," Vanessa snapped, wiping her eyes with a linen napkin. "It is about loyalty. It is about your place in this family. You know how hard your father works to keep this legacy alive for you children. And you throw a tantrum and walk out, leaving him in the lurch. He has not slept in 2 days because he is so worried about the business." "He should be worried," I said, my voice hardening. "He lost his best employee." "Do not be arrogant," Desmond rumbled, his voice deep and threatening. "You are replaceable, Nia. Everyone is replaceable. Your mother convinced me to give you one last chance to make this right." "Make it right," I repeated. "You want to pay me what I am worth." "No," my mother interjected, reaching across the table to grab my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "We want you to apologize to your father. We want you to admit you were disrespectful and ungrateful. If you do that, and return the company property, he is willing to let you have your job back. At your old salary, of course. You need to earn back his trust before you can talk about raises." I pulled my hand away as if I had been burned. "You brought me here to surrender, not to talk." "You are a woman, Nia," my mother said, her voice dropping to a harsh whisper. "Why are you so competitive with your brothers? They are men. They need to feel big. They need to be the providers. Your job is to be the glue that holds this family together, not the hammer that breaks it apart. You are destroying the peace for what? Pride." I looked around the table. I saw the smug satisfaction on my brothers' faces. I saw the indifference in my father's eyes. And I saw the pathetic desperation in my mother, a woman who would rather see her daughter exploited than see her husband challenged. I realized then that I was not just fighting my father. I was fighting the entire toxic ecosystem that enabled him. I was completely alone. The roast beef sat cold on my plate, a perfect metaphor for the affection in this room. I was about to stand up and leave when Emily cleared her throat loudly. She extended her left hand under the crystal chandelier, wiggling her fingers so the light danced off a massive, pear-shaped diamond ring that looked heavy enough to sink a small boat. "Oh my God, look at that sparkle!" My mother gasped, her tears instantly forgotten as she reached out to touch Emily's hand. "It is stunning, Marcus. You really outdid yourself this time." Marcus leaned back in his chair, puffing out his chest like a proud rooster. "Well, you know me, Mom. Nothing but the best for my queen. We had a great quarter. The performance bonus finally came through, so I decided to splurge. I felt the air leave my lungs. The quarterly bonus. The bonus that was tied directly to the operational efficiency targets I had met. The bonus that came from the savings I had generated by renegotiating our fuel contracts 3 months ago. Marcus had not even attended the meetings where those contracts were signed. He had been in Miami for a bachelor party. "That is my money," I said, my voice cutting through their admiration. "That bonus was generated by my department. By my work." Emily laughed, a tinkling, condescending sound that made my skin crawl. She pulled her hand back and admired the stone. "Oh, Nia, do not be so petty. It is unbecoming. Marcus is the director of strategy. He directs. You just execute. There is a difference. Besides, look at it. It is an investment. You should be happy for your brother instead of being jealous. Jealousy gives you wrinkles, you know." "Jealous," I repeated, standing up so abruptly my chair screeched against the floor. "I am not jealous, Emily. I am disgusted. You are wearing my 60-hour work weeks on your finger. You are drinking wine paid for by the contracts I signed. You are all parasites." Desmond slammed his hand on the table. "Sit down, Naya. You are embarrassing yourself. Marcus earned that bonus because he holds the title. That is how corporate structures work. If you wanted the bonus, you should have been born a man." The bluntness of his sexism took my breath away. There was no pretense anymore, no attempt to hide it. He truly believed that my biology made my labor less valuable. I looked at my mother, waiting for her to say something, anything. She just looked down at her plate, cutting a piece of meat as if she could not hear the conversation. She had chosen her side. She had chosen the jewelry and the status and the men who provided it, regardless of the cost to her daughter. "I am done," I said, grabbing my purse. "I am not apologizing. I am not coming back to work. And I am certainly not sitting here watching you spend the money you stole from me." I turned to leave, but Desmond's voice followed me, low and venomous. "You walk out of here, Nia, and I will make sure you never work in logistics in Atlanta again. I know everyone in this town. I will tell them exactly what kind of employee you are. Unstable, thief, liar. Do not expect a reference letter." I stopped at the doorway and looked back at them. The perfect family portrait. The father who exploited his children, the mother who enabled him, the brother who stole credit, and the sister-in-law who wore the spoils of war. "Keep your reference letter." "Dad," I said, "you are going to need it more than I will." I walked out into the night air. I was trembling, but not from fear. I was trembling from the sheer force of the bridge I had just burned. I had no job. I had no family. I had no home. I was completely alone in the world. But as I got into my rental car, I realized that being alone was infinitely better than being surrounded by people who made me feel lonely. I spent the next 3 days refining my resume until it was razor sharp. On paper, I was a logistics unicorn. I had managed international supply chains, streamlined operations, and brought in millions in revenue. I walked into the interview at Apex Freight feeling invincible. The hiring manager was practically drooling over my portfolio. He told me I was overqualified, but they would love to have me. He shook my hand and said he would send the offer letter by Friday. Friday came and went. On Monday, I received a generic automated email stating they had decided to go in a different direction. I was confused, but undeterred. I applied to Delta Cargo. The interview was flawless. The VP asked me when I could start. 2 days later, I got a text saying the position had been put on hold. When the third rejection came from a mid-sized firm that was desperate for a COO, I knew something was wrong. In the logistics world, reputation is everything, and mine was sterling. Or at least it had been. I called Chloe, a former colleague who had moved to HR at one of the firms that rejected me. She tried to dodge my call, but I was persistent. Finally, she agreed to meet me for coffee on the outskirts of town, far away from the business district. Chloe looked nervous when I sat down. She kept checking her watch and looking at the door. "Nia," she whispered, leaning in close. "I should not be telling you this. I could lose my job. But we have been friends for a long time and you deserve to know." "Know what?" I asked, my stomach tightening. "Why is nobody hiring me?" "It is your father," Chloe said. "Desmond made personal calls to the CEOs of every major logistics firm in Atlanta. He put you on the blacklist, Nia." The blacklist. It was an industry myth, a do-not-hire list for executives who had committed fraud or corporate espionage. "What did he say?" I asked, my voice barely audible. "He told them you stole proprietary client data before you left." Chloe said, her eyes full of pity. "He said you had a psychotic break in the office and threw equipment at staff. He told them you are mentally unstable and a liability. He said hiring you would be considered an act of aggression against Peyton Logistics." I sat back in my chair, feeling the blood drain from my face. He did not just want to teach me a lesson. He wanted to destroy me. He wanted to make sure I had no choice but to return to him broken and begging for scraps. He was willing to ruin my professional reputation, the reputation I had built with my own blood and sweat, just to prove a point. "He thinks he owns this town," Chloe said quietly. "And right now, nobody wants to cross him. You are radioactive, Nia." I thanked her and walked back to my car. I did not cry. The sadness was gone, replaced by a cold, hard realization. My father had declared war. He thought cutting off my supply lines would make me surrender. He forgot that I was the one who knew how to build supply lines from scratch. If I could not find a seat at the table in Atlanta, I would just have to build my own table. My bank account was bleeding dry. I had 2 weeks of savings left before I hit zero. The blacklist was effective. No one would touch me. I had to make a choice: crawl back to my father or survive by any means necessary. I chose survival. I spent the next 2 days liquidating my life. I hauled my collection of designer handbags, Birkins, Pradas, Chanels, into a high-end consignment shop in Buckhead. These were not just bags, they were trophies. Each one represented a bonus I had fought for, a milestone I had reached despite my family's dismissal. The shop owner, a woman named Sarah, whom I had known for years, looked at me with raised eyebrows as I dumped them onto the counter. "Are you sure, Nia?" she asked, running her hand over a vintage Kelly bag. "This one is rare. You loved this bag. I need the cash." "Sarah," I said, my voice clipped, "just give me the best price you can." She wrote me a check for $20,000. It was a fraction of what they were worth, but it was enough to keep me alive. Next went the shoes, then the jewelry. I stripped my life down to the essentials. With the cash in hand, I found a studio apartment in East Point, a neighborhood my mother would have called undesirable. The building smelled of stale cigarettes and boiled cabbage. The walls were thin enough to hear my neighbors' arguments, and the view was a dumpster in the alley. It was a far cry from the glass tower in Midtown, but it was mine. No one could evict me here. The lowest point came on a Tuesday afternoon. I was selling my last piece of furniture, a custom-made ergonomic office chair, on a local marketplace app. A woman arrived to pick it up in a beat-up minivan. As she handed me the cash, she squinted at me. "Wait, aren't you Nia Payton?" she asked. "I used to work reception at Apex Freight. You were the keynote speaker at the Women in Logistics conference last year." I froze. I was wearing oversized sweatpants and a stained t-shirt, my hair tied up in a messy bun. I looked like a shadow of the woman who had stood on that stage, preaching empowerment and success. "I heard what happened," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper. "They said you had a breakdown. I am so sorry, honey. It must be hard." She pressed an extra $20 bill into my hand. "Here, get yourself something to eat." I stared at the bill. Charity, pity, from a woman I used to inspire. The humiliation burned through me like acid. I wanted to throw the money back in her face. I wanted to scream that I was fine, that I was just restructuring. But I did not. I needed that $20. "Thank you," I whispered, clutching the bill. She drove away, leaving me standing on the cracked pavement of my new reality. The shame was a physical weight, heavy and suffocating. But beneath the shame, something else began to harden. My father wanted to break me. He wanted to strip me of my dignity until I had nothing left but him. He had succeeded in stripping me of my things, but he had failed to touch my resolve. As I walked back into my tiny empty apartment, I pinned that $20 bill to the wall. It was not money anymore. It was a reminder. I was at rock bottom, and the only way out was to climb over the wreckage of the Payton empire. I stopped refreshing my email inbox. The rejection letters were just digital noise at this point. My father had made sure the gates of the Atlanta logistics world were barred shut. I could keep banging on them until my knuckles bled, or I could find another way in. I looked at the check from the consignment shop sitting on my counter. $20,000. It was not enough to live on for a year, but it was enough to start a war. I opened my laptop and navigated to the Secretary of State website. My hands were steady as I typed in the name I had chosen during a sleepless night on the floor. N-Force Logistics. It sounded strong, capable. It sounded like me. I paid the registration fees and the expedited processing costs, watching my bank balance dip dangerously low. Next came the insurance and the bond. By the time I clicked submit on the final form, I had less than $2,000 to my name. My office was a scratched laminate dining table I had found on the curb. My ergonomic chair was gone, so I sat on a hard wooden stool that made my back ache. My view was a brick wall and an overflowing dumpster. But as I stared at the confirmation screen declaring Enforce Logistics, a legal entity in the state of Georgia, I felt a surge of power I had never felt in the corner office at Peyton. This was mine. No one could fire me from this. I spent the next 48 hours building a website. I could not afford a developer, so I used a free template. It was basic. The logo was a simple, bold font. The stock photos were generic. It looked exactly like what it was, a desperate attempt by a one-woman operation to look like a contender. I hit publish at 3 in the morning and collapsed onto my mattress. The phone woke me up at noon. It was Jamal. I debated ignoring it, but I knew he would just keep calling. I answered knowing exactly what was coming. "So I see you are officially open for business," Jamal said, his voice thick with amusement. "I just saw the website, Enforce. Really? It looks like a high school project, Nia. Did you design that yourself, or did you hire a toddler?" I rubbed the sleep from my eyes. "It is functional, Jamal. Unlike you." He laughed, a loud braying sound that echoed in the receiver. "Dad and I are looking at it right now on the big screen in the conference room. We are literally crying, laughing. What are you going to move, Nia? Groceries? Etsy packages? I hope you have a big trunk in that rental car because we blocked you from the commercial fleet registry too." I sat up straight, the mattress springs squeaking beneath me. "You are watching my website in the conference room. That means you are not working. Which means the Savannah shipment is probably still stuck." Jamal stopped laughing. "That is handled. Mostly. Anyway, Dad says if you get tired of playing CEO, he might have an opening for a janitor. You are good at cleaning up messes, right?" I hung up. I did not feel humiliated. I felt validated. They were watching. They were mocking me, sure, but they were watching. They knew I was still in the game. I looked at my sad little website on the screen. It was ugly. It was cheap. But it was live. Jamal saw a joke. I saw a weapon, and I was about to sharpen it. I printed out a stack of brochures on cheap paper and hit the pavement. I started with the small businesses in East Point, the mom-and-pop shops, the local manufacturers, the places too small for Peyton Logistics to bother with. I walked into warehouses smelling of sawdust and grease, pitching my services to skeptical managers who looked at my business card like it was a joke. Enforce, a foreman at a tile company, asked, flicking the card onto his desk. "Never heard of you. We stick with the big guys." "Sorry, sweetheart." Rejection after rejection. My feet ached in my scuffed heels. The summer heat was oppressive, making my cheap blazer stick to my back. By 4 p.m., I was exhausted, hungry, and defeated. I walked into a coffee shop near the business district, desperate for air conditioning and a cheap iced tea. As I waited in line, counting the change in my wallet to make sure I had enough, a familiar voice boomed across the cafe. "Well, look who it is, the CEO of nothing." I turned slowly. Marcus was sitting at a corner table with 2 junior associates from Peyton Logistics. He looked immaculate in a linen suit, a half-eaten croissant, and an espresso in front of him. He smirked, gesturing for me to come over. I wanted to leave, but running away was not an option. "Hello, Marcus," I said, keeping my voice steady. "Working hard, I see." "Harder than you," he laughed, leaning back. "I heard you're going door to door in the industrial park, begging for scraps. It's pathetic, Nia. Dad was right. You're not cut out for this." The associates snickered, looking at their shoes. I felt a flush of heat rise up my neck. "I am building a client base, Marcus. It takes time." "It takes talent," he shot back. "And money, neither of which you have." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crisp $100 bill. He crumpled it into a ball and tossed it onto the table in front of me. It landed with a soft thud next to his coffee cup. "Here," he sneered. "Get yourself a real dinner tonight. Maybe a steak. You look thin. Consider it a charitable donation from Peyton Logistics. We can write it off." The cafe went quiet. People were watching. The humiliation was a physical weight pressing down on my chest. I looked at the money. It was more than I had in my bank account right now. It could buy groceries for 2 weeks. It could pay for gas. I reached out and picked up the bill. Marcus's grin widened. "That's it," he said. "Take it. You know you need it." I smoothed the bill out on the table, pressing the creases flat with my palm. Then I turned to the young waitress who was clearing a nearby table, looking uncomfortable. "Excuse me," I called out. She walked over, wary. "Yes, ma'am?" "This is for you," I said, handing her the $100, "for having to deal with customers like him." Marcus's jaw dropped. The waitress stared at the money, then at me wide-eyed. "Are you sure?" "Absolutely," I said, locking eyes with my brother. "I don't take money from people who don't earn it." I picked up my iced tea and walked out. I could feel Marcus's fury burning into my back, but I didn't care. My stomach was growling, and my bank account was empty, but my spine was made of steel. He thought he could buy my dignity for $100. He just found out it was priceless. The ink was barely dry on my first independent contract when the courier arrived. I was sitting in my converted garage office admiring the modest logo of Nia's design taped to the wall. It was small, it was quiet, but it was mine. For the first time in years, the air tasted like freedom. I actually believed I had escaped Desmond's shadow. That illusion shattered with 3 sharp knocks on the door. A man in a charcoal suit stood on my porch. He did not smile. He did not offer a greeting. He simply verified my name and thrust a thick, heavy envelope into my hands. The return address was stamped with the gold foil logo of Sterling and Vance, the city's most ruthless corporate law firm. They were Desmond's personal attack dogs. My hands trembled as I tore the seal. Inside was a legal nightmare. The cover letter was brutal and direct. It was a cease and desist order. "Dear Miss Nia," it read, "it has come to our client's attention that you are operating a business in direct competition with Desmond Enterprises. This constitutes a flagrant violation of the non-compete agreement signed at the commencement of your previous employment." The demands were absolute. I was to dissolve my company immediately. I was to surrender all client lists and intellectual property. Furthermore, they were demanding damages of $50,000 for breach of contract. If I did not comply within 48 hours, they would file a lawsuit that would bury me in debt for the rest of my life. I collapsed into my chair, the room spinning. Desmond had found me. He had been watching. He didn't just want me out of his company. He wanted to ensure I couldn't survive anywhere else. He wanted me destitute and crawling back or destroyed completely. Across town in his glass-walled office, I knew exactly what Desmond was doing. He was likely leaning back in his leather chair, swirling his expensive scotch, waiting for the phone to ring. He expected me to call him, begging and crying. He treated this like a game of chess where he had all the queens and I was just a pawn to be flicked off the board. Panic clawed at my throat. I couldn't afford a lawyer. I couldn't afford a $50 parking ticket, let alone a $50,000 settlement. "Think, Nia, think," I whispered to myself. I scrambled to the closet where I kept my old records. I tore through boxes of tax returns and old pay stubs, tossing papers onto the floor in a frenzy. I needed to find my copy of that employment contract. I needed to see exactly what I had signed all those years ago. It took 20 agonizing minutes to find the dusty blue binder. I flipped through the pages, my eyes scanning frantically for the non-compete clause. I found it on page 12. It looked ironclad. It looked hopeless. But then I looked closer at the bottom of the page. My eyes narrowed. I traced the signature line with my finger. The date next to the signature was from 3 years ago. I stopped breathing. 3 years ago, I was in the hospital recovering from surgery. I wasn't even in the office that week. I pulled out my phone and zoomed in on the signature in the binder. It looked like mine, but the loop on the N was wrong. It was too sharp, too aggressive. It wasn't my handwriting. Desmond hadn't just sent a threat. He had sent a fraudulent document. And for the first time since the courier arrived, my fear began to curdle into cold, hard rage. The charcoal suit returned the next morning, expecting a surrender. He didn't even knock this time. He just stood on the porch checking his watch, radiating the smug patience of a man who gets paid by the hour to ruin lives. Inside, I wasn't crying. I wasn't packing. I was staring at a piece of paper that had turned into a shield. After finding the suspicious signature on the document they sent, I had torn my apartment apart looking for the original onboarding packet from 5 years ago. I found it buried in a box labeled miscellaneous under old sketchbooks. It was a crisp, cream-colored folder Desmond had given me on my first day. I remembered that day vividly. Desmond had breezed into the conference room, tossed the folder on the table, and taken a call on his cell phone. He had pointed at the signature line snapped, "Sign it. I have a lunch meeting," and walked out before the ink was dry on my name. I opened the folder now. There was my signature, young, eager, a little shaky, but across from it, the line for employer representative was stark, beautiful, empty white space. Desmond hadn't signed it. In his arrogance, in his rush to be important, he had deemed the paperwork beneath him. He had likely thrown his copy to an assistant and forgotten it existed. Legally, without his countersignature executing the agreement, the non-compete clause was nothing more than a wish list. It wasn't a binding contract, it was a rough draft. I opened the door before the lawyer could raise his fist to knock. "Ms. Nia," he said, holding out a hand for the keys to my office. "I trust you've made the sensible decision." "I have," I said, my voice steady. "I decided to do some reading." I handed him a photocopy of the last page of my original contract. He took it with a sneer, his eyes scanning the page dismissively. Then he stopped. The sneer faltered. He squinted at the bottom of the page. "As you can see," I said, leaning against the doorframe, crossing my arms, "your client never executed the agreement. There is no contract. There is no non-compete. There is only a piece of paper I signed 5 years ago that he was too busy to validate." The lawyer's face flushed a blotchy red. He flipped the page over, looking for a stamp, a mark, anything. This is a clerical error. We have a copy on file." "You have a copy with a forged signature dated 3 years ago," I cut him off, my voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "I found that one too, so you have two choices. You can walk away right now and tell Desmond he lost, or I can take both these documents to the ethics board and the police, and we can discuss fraud and forgery. Which one sounds more sensible to you?" The lawyer opened his mouth, then closed it. He looked at the empty signature line again, the ghost of Desmond's arrogance staring back at him. He realized he had been sent into battle with an unloaded gun. He shoved the paper into his briefcase, snapping the lock shut with a violent click. "This isn't over," he muttered, but he was already backing away. "It is for you," I said. "Get off my property." I watched him retreat to his car, his confident stride replaced by a hurried scuttle. For the first time in 5 years, the shadow over me didn't look so big. It looked like a man who forgot to sign his name. While Nia was securing her first victory in a dusty garage, the glass-walled empire of Peyton Logistics was burning to the ground. The office floor, which had hummed with the quiet, rhythmic efficiency of a Swiss watch for 5 years, now sounded like a trading floor during a market crash. Phones were not just ringing, they were screaming a relentless chorus of demands that no one knew how to answer. In the center of the dispatch hub stood Jamal, the man Desmond had handpicked to replace Nia because he was cheaper and louder. Now he was just loud. He had a phone pressed so hard against his ear that his knuckles were white, and sweat was staining the collar of the expensive shirt he had bought to celebrate his promotion. He was shouting at a logistics partner in Alaska, his voice cracking with genuine terror as he tried to understand why a shipment of temperature-sensitive pharmaceuticals destined for the humid heat of Atlanta had been routed through a freezing layover in Anchorage. The cargo wasn't just lost, it was destroyed frozen solid because Jamal didn't know that seasonal climate routing was a manual override Nia performed every morning. 3 desks away, Marcus was drowning in a sea of white paper. He stared blankly at a stack of customs declarations that had been returned with angry red rejection stamps. He was frantically typing into a search bar, trying to find the harmonized system code for industrial silicone, a number Nia had memorized 3 years ago. A junior coordinator rushed up to him breathless and pale, announcing that a long-haul truck was stuck at the Canadian border because the bond paperwork was missing. The driver had been waiting 6 hours and was threatening to turn around and dump the load. Marcus snapped at the junior employee to find the blue folder, only to be reminded with a harsh whisper that the blue folder was gone because Nia was gone. High above the anarchy on the floor, Desmond paced his office, the vibrations of failure rising through the floorboards. He poured himself a glass of whiskey, his hand shaking slightly as he tried to convince himself this was just a transition period. The intercom on his desk buzzed, cutting through his denial. His assistant's voice was trembling as she announced that Arthur Sterling, the CEO of Tech Global, was on line 1, and he was not holding. Tech Global was their whale, the client that accounted for 40% of their quarterly revenue. Desmond swallowed the whiskey in one burn, cleared his throat, and picked up the phone with his best charming baritone asking what he owed the pleasure to. The voice on the other end cut him off like a guillotine. Sterling didn't want charm, he wanted blood. He informed Desmond that his supply chain manager had just located their prototype components sitting in a warehouse in Mexico City, thousands of miles from their intended destination in Silicon Valley. The investor demo was the next day, and the hardware was missing. Desmond tried to lie, claiming it was a carrier error, but Sterling was ahead of him. He had already called the carrier and confirmed that the paperwork had been filed for the wrong destination code by Jamal. Sterling's voice dropped to a lethal growl as he delivered the ultimatum. They were losing $1 million an hour, and if those parts weren't in California by the next morning, he would void the contract for gross negligence. The line went dead before Desmond could utter a defense. He stared at the receiver, then walked to the glass wall to look down at his kingdom. He saw Jamal shouting at a screen and Marcus holding his head in his hands. And for the first time, Desmond realized that Nia hadn't just been doing a job. She had been the glue holding his entire house of cards together, and he had just ripped her out. The digital clock on the nightstand read 2:14 a.m., the silence of the room broken only by the persistent buzzing of a phone. Nia groaned, fumbling for the device in the dark, squinting against the harsh blue light of the screen. The caller ID didn't say Desmond or Peyton Logistics. It read, Arthur Sterling, CEO Tech Global. Her heart hammered against her ribs as she sat up, clearing her throat to banish the sleep before swiping to answer. Clients like Sterling didn't make personal calls at this hour unless the building was burning down. Nia, thank God! Arthur Sterling's voice was unrecognizable, the polished, commanding tone he used in boardrooms replaced by raw, unvarnished panic. He apologized for the lateness but explained he had been trying to reach Desmond for 2 hours to no avail. His calls were going to voicemail and the office line was dead. Meanwhile, his supply chain was currently bleeding out on a tarmac in Mexico City. Nia rubbed her eyes, her mind snapping into focus as she reminded him that she no longer worked for Peyton Logistics and couldn't access their systems. Sterling snapped back, his patience frayed by stress, admitting that while Desmond claimed to have streamlined the department, he had actually lobotomized it. He explained that a shipment containing prototype chips for the Tokyo summit had been routed to the wrong hemisphere by Jamal, causing a Level 5 customs breach. If those parts didn't land in Japan by 4 p.m., their time Tech Global would lose a $200 million contract. He was calling Nia because she was the only person who knew how to fix such a breach without waiting 3 days for clearance. He didn't need the company, he needed the person who actually did the work. Nia looked around her dark bedroom, her eyes landing on the small desk in the corner where her laptop sat closed. This was the moment she had been waiting for. I can fix it, she said, her voice steady. But I'm not doing this as an ex-employee doing a favor. I'm doing this as an independent contractor. When Sterling replied that he didn't care what she called herself, as long as the cargo got in the air, Nia seized her chance. My consultancy is called N-Force, she stated clearly, testing the name on her tongue. I will send over a consulting agreement immediately. My emergency rate is triple the industry standard, and I require a retainer wired within the hour. There was a brief silence on the line before Sterling let out a breath that sounded like relief, agreeing instantly to her terms and granting her full authorization. Naya hung up the phone and threw the covers off, the exhaustion vanishing to be replaced by the electric thrill of adrenaline. She walked to her desk and flipped open her laptop, the screen illuminating her face. She wasn't just a logistics coordinator anymore. She was N-Force, and she was about to show Tech Global exactly what they had been paying for all these years. For the next 24 hours, the world outside Nia's window ceased to exist. Her garage office became a command center. She did not panic. She did not scream. She simply went to work. The shipment was stuck in a customs purgatory in Mexico City, a black hole where cargo usually sat for weeks. But Nia knew something Desmond and Jamal did not. She knew the port director, Javier, preferred direct phone calls over emails, and she knew he owed her a favor from a crisis 2 years ago. She dialed the number. It was 3 a.m. in Mexico City. Javier answered on the fourth ring, groggy and irritated. Nia didn't waste time with pleasantries. She switched to fluent Spanish, her voice calm and authoritative. She explained the error. She didn't blame the carrier. She took ownership of the solution. She emailed the corrected commercial invoices while they spoke, guiding him through the digital paperwork line by line. By the time the sun rose over her city, the red flag on the tracking screen turned yellow. The cargo was moving. But moving wasn't enough. It had to fly. Nia spent the next 12 hours juggling time zones. She coordinated a specialized courier to extract the pallet from the warehouse and rush it to the airport. She negotiated a slot on a cargo freighter bound for Narita International Airport, leveraging her reputation to bump a shipment of luxury handbags. She didn't eat. She drank cold coffee. Her eyes burned, but she didn't blink. She watched the little digital airplane icon cross the Pacific Ocean on her monitor, willing it to move faster. At 3:55 p.m. Tokyo time, 5 minutes before the deadline, the status bar turned a brilliant, beautiful green. Delivered. Nia slumped back in her chair, the adrenaline crash hitting her like a physical blow. She had done it. She had pulled a miracle out of a disaster. Her phone rang immediately. It was Arthur Sterling. "I just got the confirmation," Sterling said. His voice was no longer panicked. It was quiet, serious, and filled with a dangerous kind of clarity. "My team in Tokyo has the prototypes. The summit is saved." "I told you I would handle it," Nia replied, her voice raspy from disuse. "You didn't just handle it, Nia. You performed a resurrection," Sterling said. "I called Desmond an hour ago to tell him the cargo was safe. Do you know what he said? He tried to take credit. He said his team worked tirelessly to rectify the error. He had no idea I hired you." Nia stayed silent. She let Desmond's lie hang in the air. "I don't do business with liars, and I don't pay for incompetence," Sterling continued. "Peyton Logistics just lost their biggest account. I am terminating my contract with Desmond effective immediately." Nia's breath caught in her throat. "Mr. Sterling, that is a massive contract. My company is just me." "It's not about the size of the building, Nia. It is about the capability of the person running it," Sterling stated firmly. "You fixed in 24 hours what Desmond couldn't figure out in 2 days. I am sending over a new contract. I want N-Force to handle Tech Global's entire North American logistics chain. The retainer is substantial. Do you accept?" Nia looked at her small garage office. She looked at the empty coffee mug and the messy desk. Then she looked at the future. "Yes," Nia said. "I accept." "Good," Sterling said. "Welcome to the big leagues. Now get some sleep. We have work to do tomorrow." The morning sun hit the glass walls of Desmond's office with a blinding, unforgiving brightness. He sat behind his mahogany desk, nursing a headache that throbbed in time with his pulse. He was waiting for a call from Arthur Sterling. He had convinced himself that his lie the previous night had worked. He told himself that business was about relationships, and he had known Arthur for a decade. Surely a small shipping error would be forgiven. At 9:05 a.m., the notification pinged on his computer. It was not a phone call. It was an email from Tech Global's legal department. The subject line consisted of 2 words that stopped Desmond's heart. Contract termination. He opened it, his eyes scanning the text in disbelief. It was a formal notice of immediate severance for cause citing gross negligence and breach of service-level agreements. They were pulling everything. The North American distribution, the Asian supply chain, the European freight. 40% of Peyton Logistics' revenue vanished in the time it took to read a single paragraph. Desmond stood up slowly. His hands were trembling. He looked at the expensive crystal tumbler on his desk, the one he had used for his celebratory scotch just yesterday. With a primal roar, he swept his arm across the desk. The glass flew across the room and shattered against the wall, exploding into 1,000 glittering shards. The sound silenced the entire floor. Outside the glass walls, heads snapped up. Jamal froze mid-type. Marcus, who was walking toward the office with a stack of excuses, stopped dead in his tracks. "Marcus!" Desmond screamed, his voice raw. "Get in here!" Marcus entered the office, stepping carefully over the broken glass. He looked like a man walking to the gallows. "Tech Global is gone!" Desmond hissed, his face a mask of red fury. "They fired us. They took the contract. Do you know how much money that is? Do you know what you and that idiot Jamal have done?" "Sir, I can explain," Marcus stammered, sweating profusely. "The system, the codes, we couldn't find the overrides." "I don't care about the codes." Desmond slammed his fist onto the desk. "I pay you to handle the codes. I pay you to fix problems, not create million-dollar disasters. You are incompetent, Marcus. You are useless without her." The mention of Nia hung in the air like smoke. Marcus saw the look in Desmond's eyes. It was the look of a man looking for a throat to cut. Marcus knew he had to deflect. He had to shift the target. "It's not incompetence, Desmond," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "It's sabotage." Desmond paused, his heavy breathing filling the room. "What are you talking about?" "Think about it," Marcus said, gaining confidence as he saw Desmond listening. "The files are missing. The client lists are scrambled. The routing protocols were changed the day she left. Nia didn't just quit. She planted a bomb. She set us up to fail so she could swoop in." Desmond's eyes narrowed. The narrative appealed to his ego. He couldn't accept that he had failed or that his new team was inept. But the idea that he had been betrayed, that he had been outmaneuvered by a snake in the grass, that made sense to him. "She planned this," Desmond muttered, the anger turning cold and focused. "She stole my client." "She stole everything," Marcus lied, cementing his safety by condemning Nia. "She probably has the Tech Global contract already." Desmond walked to the window and looked out at the city. He didn't see the skyline. He saw a war zone. "If she wants a war," Desmond whispered, "I will give her a war. Call Sterling and Vance. Tell them to double the lawsuit. I want her buried." While Desmond was plotting legal warfare in the dark, Emily decided the best way to handle the company's transition was to throw a celebration. She didn't understand logistics profit margins or the gaping hole Tech Global's departure had just left in the ledger. She only understood image. Convincing herself that the company needed a rebranding launch to signal strength to the market, she treated the corporate credit card like a bottomless well. She rented the penthouse terrace of the Sapphire Hotel, ordered cases of vintage Dom Perignon, and hired a DJ whose hourly rate cost more than a warehouse worker made in a month. It wasn't a business strategy. It was a vanity project designed to soothe her own ego. She didn't just spend the money, she broadcasted it. She flooded Instagram with high-definition photos of herself holding crystal flutes, posing next to a 6-foot ice sculpture carved into the shape of the Peyton logo. The captions were tone-deaf masterpieces of delusion, #boss life, #empire building, and #new era. She tagged the company in every post, smiling brightly for the camera, completely oblivious to who was actually watching her feed. Frank Miller was watching. The owner of Miller Freight, a fleet of 50 trucks that moved 80% of Peyton's domestic ground cargo, was sitting in his home office, staring at a stack of unpaid invoices from Peyton Logistics, totaling nearly 6 figures. For weeks, Marcus had told him that cash flow was tight, due to banking errors, and that checks were in the mail. Frank had been patient out of loyalty to the company's history. Then his phone pinged. He saw Emily's story, a video of her spraying a $300 bottle of champagne over a crowd of sycophants. The vein in Frank's temple began to throb. He wasn't seeing a party, he was seeing his fuel money, his driver's wages, and his patience evaporating into the night sky. Frank didn't call Desmond. He didn't call Marcus. He knew they were liars who would only offer more excuses. He made a command decision that would cripple Peyton's ground operations instantly. He sent a mass dispatch to his drivers. Stop all Peyton loads. Drop trailers at the nearest secure yard. Do not deliver. Return to base. Then he opened his contacts and scrolled to a number he had saved years ago, a number he respected because the person on the other end had never bounced a check or missed a deadline. Naya was deep in the weeds of organizing the initial Tech Global routing when her phone rang. "Nia, it's Frank Miller," the gravelly voice said without preamble. "I just saw your replacement's little fashion show on the internet. If they have money for ice sculptures, they have money to pay me. But they aren't paying me, so I'm done." Nia listened, sensing the tectonic plates of the industry shifting in her favor. "I'm sorry to hear that, Frank," she said, keeping her voice professional. "But why are you calling me—" Frank's voice was serious. "Because in 5 years you never lied to me. I heard you're on your own now. I have 50 trucks sitting idle because I refuse to move another box for Desmond. You got freight that needs moving." Nia smiled, looking at the massive Tech Global manifest on her screen. "Frank," she said, "I have a contract with Tech Global that needs a dedicated fleet. Can you start tonight?" "For you, Nia?" Frank replied. "My engines are already running." Frank Miller's defection was not a quiet exit. It was a signal flare fired into the night sky. In the insular world of logistics, vendors talk. By midday Tuesday, the rumors that Peyton Logistics was insolvent were spreading through the supply chain like a fever. 2 regional air freight forwarders and a specialized packaging firm contacted Nia before lunch. They had all seen Emily's champagne tower on Instagram while holding unpaid invoices. They didn't want excuses. They wanted to work with the woman who had paid them on time for 5 years. Nia accepted them all, integrating their capacities into her growing network. She now had the clients and the infrastructure, but she lacked the most critical component, the human engine, to run it. She couldn't manage Tech Global alone forever. She needed a wolf pack. She turned her attention to the glass tower she had left behind. She knew exactly what was happening inside. With the Tech Global contract gone and the trucking fleet grounded, the atmosphere at Peyton would be toxic. Marcus, desperate to deflect blame from his own incompetence, would be cracking the whip on the few competent people left, blaming them for the systemic failures of leadership. Nia opened her encrypted messaging app and scrolled to a group chat that had been silent since her departure. She typed a single sentence: "I am hiring." Inside Peyton Logistics, the message lit up 5 screens simultaneously. Sarah, the senior customs broker, who could quote tariff codes from memory, looked at her phone while Marcus screamed at her about a missing bill of lading he had lost himself. David, the hazardous materials specialist, read the text while Jamal tried to force him to load flammable liquids onto a non-certified truck. Elena, the night shift ops manager, who hadn't slept in 3 days, saw the notification through blurry eyes. For them, Nia's message wasn't a job offer. It was a life raft thrown into a storm. Nia didn't have to conduct interviews. She made 5 phone calls in 30 minutes. She didn't offer them corner offices or empty promises. She offered them equity, respect, and a leadership team that actually understood the difference between a pallet and a container. She offered them a chance to build the company they had always wanted Peyton to be. The exodus began at 2:00 p.m. It was coordinated and lethal. Sarah walked into Marcus's office and placed her badge on his desk. She didn't shout. She didn't argue. She simply stated that her resignation was effective immediately. Before Marcus could process the betrayal, David walked in behind her, followed by Elena and two senior dispatchers. They moved with the synchronized precision of a team that had worked together for a decade. "You can't do this," Marcus sputtered, realizing the terrifying reality that he was about to be left alone with the chaos he had created. "You are abandoning the ship. I will sue you. I will make sure you never work in logistics again." "We already have jobs, Marcus," Sarah said, her voice cool and level. "And we start today." They walked out of the building together, carrying boxes of personal effects, leaving behind a silent floor and a management team that had no idea how to operate their own software. An hour later, 5 cars pulled into the driveway of Nia's rental. They didn't see a garage, they saw headquarters. Nia opened the door, welcoming her new executive team. N-Force wasn't just a consultancy anymore, it was an army. With the departure of the core team, the safety net that had silently caught every one of Peyton Logistics' errors for years was gone. The floor was now manned by Jamal and a handful of terrified temps who did not know a bill of lading from a lunch menu. The inevitable catastrophe did not take long to arrive. It came in the form of a 40-foot refrigerated container filled with high-grade insulin destined for a distribution center in Phoenix. Handling cold chain logistics requires surgical precision. Nia used to triple-check the generator fuel levels and temperature settings personally before any truck left the yard. Jamal, however, found the checklist tedious. In a rush to meet a dispatch quota and impress Marcus, he had bypassed the pre-trip inspection entirely. He marked the safety protocols as complete in the system and waved the driver out of the gate. He did not notice that the cooling unit was set to ambient instead of frozen. He effectively shipped a metal box of sensitive medicine into the Arizona desert in July without turning on the air conditioning. The blowback was instantaneous and violent. The client's quality assurance team opened the container in Phoenix and found $500,000 worth of life-saving medication cooked into useless sludge. The data loggers inside the truck told a damning story of negligence. The internal temperature had spiked to 100 degrees within 4 hours of departure. Desmond received the call from the insurance adjuster at 10:00 a.m. He sat in his office confident that his premium policy would shield him. He was wrong. The adjuster's voice was dry, clinical, and absolutely final. He informed Desmond that their investigation revealed the cooling unit had never been engaged. The policy covered accidents and mechanical failures. It did not cover gross negligence or operator stupidity. The claim was denied in full. Desmond dropped the phone. The room seemed to tilt. $500,000. That was not just a loss on a spreadsheet. That was the company's entire operating liquidity for the quarter. To avoid a lawsuit that would destroy his reputation permanently, he would have to pay the pharmaceutical client out of his own pocket. He would have to liquidate personal assets. For the first time since firing Nia, the red mist of anger evaporated, replaced by a cold, slimy terror in his gut. He looked through the glass walls at his empire. It was a ghost town. He saw Marcus hiding in his office with the blinds drawn. He saw Jamal obliviously scrolling through his phone, unaware that he had just cost his boss $500,000. Desmond unlocked his cell phone. His thumb hovered over the contact list. He scrolled down to Nia. He stared at the name. He knew she could fix this. She knew the insurance adjusters personally. She knew the loopholes in the negotiation tactics. She could probably talk the client down or find a way to appeal the claim. She could save the ship. All he had to do was press the button. All he had to do was say 2 words. "I'm sorry." His thumb trembled over the glass. He imagined her voice. He imagined the look of vindication in her eyes. The bile rose in his throat. He couldn't do it. He would rather bankrupt the company and burn the building to ash than let the woman he called a glorified secretary see him beg. He locked the phone and threw it into his desk drawer with a heavy thud. He pulled out his personal checkbook instead. As he wrote the check that would drain his savings, his pen tore through the paper. He was paying for his arrogance dollar by dollar, and he was terrified that he was running out of funds before he ran out of pride. With the Tech Global contract secured and 5 senior staff members cramped around a folding table, the garage was no longer a symbol of humble beginnings. It was a liability. Tech Global required secured servers, biometric access control, and a conference room that did not smell like lawnmower gas. 2 weeks after the exodus from Peyton Logistics, Nia signed the lease on a fourth-floor suite in the Skyline Business Park, directly overlooking the harbor. It wasn't just an office, it was a vantage point. The move was swift and clinical. By Monday morning, the Enforce logo, a stylized steel shield, was etched onto the glass doors. Inside, the hum of productivity was different from the frantic panic at Peyton. Here, Sarah managed customs clearance on dual monitors. David coordinated hazmat routes with calm precision, and the air conditioner actually worked. It was into this atmosphere of quiet power that Nia's mother, Catherine, walked in unannounced. Catherine had not visited Nia in 2 years. She was a woman who valued status above all else, and in her eyes, Desmond Peyton was a titan of industry, while Nia was merely the help. Desmond had called her that morning, feigning concern. He suggested that Nia might be in over her head and hinted that she was operating an illegal sweatshop out of a basement. He wanted intel, and he knew Catherine was the perfect spy. Catherine expected to find chaos. She expected to find her daughter in a dimly lit room surrounded by pizza boxes and unpaid bills. She walked past the reception desk, ignoring the security guard ready to deliver a lecture on responsibility and the importance of apologizing to powerful men. She stopped dead in the hallway. Through the glass partitions, she saw a bustling operations floor. She saw Frank Miller, the owner of the largest trucking fleet in the city, shaking Nia's hand and laughing. She saw the Tech Global logo projected onto the main screen, tracking shipments across 3 continents. She saw Sarah, whom she recognized from Peyton's company Christmas parties, directing a team of junior dispatchers. This wasn't a struggling startup. This was a machine. Nia stepped out of her office holding a tablet. She stopped when she saw her mother. She didn't smile. She didn't offer a hug. She simply waited. "Desmond told me you were struggling," Catherine said, her voice thin and wavering as she gestured vaguely at the sleek furniture and the panoramic view. "He said you were confused." "Desmond lied," Nia said calmly. "Are you here to spy for him, or are you here to see your daughter?" Catherine looked at Nia. She saw the tailored blazer, the authority in her posture, the way the staff looked at her with genuine respect. For a moment, the dynamic shifted. The daughter was no longer the subordinate. "I just wanted to see," Catherine murmured, clutching her purse. "I didn't know." "Now you know," Nia said. "You can tell him the view is better from here. I have a meeting." Nia turned her back and walked into the conference room, closing the door. Catherine stood there for a moment, an intruder in her daughter's success, before turning and fleeing to the elevator. An hour later, Catherine sat in Desmond's office. The air was stale, smelling of stress and old coffee. Desmond leaned forward, his eyes desperate. "Well," Desmond demanded, "is she operating out of a closet? Is she failing?" Catherine looked at the man she had admired for his wealth. Then she thought of the hive of activity she had just seen. She realized she had bet on the wrong horse. "She isn't failing, Desmond," Catherine whispered, fear creeping into her eyes. "She has a corner office. She has your staff. And she has Tech Global. It's not a small business. It's an empire." Desmond sank back into his chair, the color draining from his face. The spy had returned, but she hadn't brought him ammunition. She had brought him a death sentence. Atlanta is a city that runs on humidity and gossip, and by the time the summer heat settled over the skyline, the name Enforce was on every lip in the logistics district. It started as a murmur in the shipping yards, truckers talking about the woman who paid early and routed efficiently, but it quickly ascended to the boardrooms of the Fortune 500. The narrative was shifting. Nia wasn't just the ex-employee who started a consultancy. She was becoming a legend, the David who had stolen Goliath's sling and was now using it to dominate the market. For Desmond Peyton, the whispers were not just annoying. They were a soundtrack to his slow-motion demise. Desmond sought refuge where he always did when the world turned against him, the manicured greens of the Oakwood Country Club. This was his sanctuary, a place where status was measured in handicaps and membership fees, and where he felt untouchable. But the sanctuary had been breached. As he stood on the putting green of the ninth hole, lining up a shot to save par, he heard two venture capitalists discussing supply chain resilience at the adjacent tee box. They weren't talking about Peyton Logistics, they were talking about how Enforce had navigated a port strike in Savannah without a single delay. Desmond missed the putt by 3 feet. "You know her, don't you, Desmond?" one of the men called out, a silver-haired banker named Sterling, no relation to Arthur but equally rich. "That girl Naya used to work your front desk. Right now she's eating everyone's lunch. You must have taught her well." The comment was meant as a jab, and it landed perfectly. Desmond's grip on his putter tightened until the leather creaked. He straightened up, forcing a smile that looked more like a snarl. "She didn't learn anything from me except how to answer a phone." Desmond scoffed loud enough for the caddies to hear. "What you are seeing isn't skill, gentlemen. It is beginner's luck. She picked up a few of my scraps, and she is riding a wave of sympathy because she plays the underdog card. But luck runs out. Systems don't." "She has Tech Global," the banker countered dryly. "That is a hell of a scrap." "She has them for now," Desmond lied, his voice dripping with arrogance he didn't feel. "Arthur Sterling is impulsive. When her little garage operation cracks under the pressure of a real crisis, and he will come back to the professionals. Enforce is a lemonade stand trying to run a railroad." He walked off the green, leaving his ball behind, his blood boiling. He knew he was losing the optics war. He couldn't just wait for Nia to fail. He had to prove he was still the king. He needed a stage. He needed a spotlight bright enough to burn her shadow away. Back in the locker room, he saw the flyer pinned to the corkboard. The annual Southeastern Logistics Gala. It was 3 weeks away. It was the industry's night of nights, a black tie affair where contracts were signed over champagne, and the pecking order was established for the fiscal year. Desmond stared at the date. This was it. He wouldn't just attend. He would dominate. He would announce the launch of Peyton Prime, a purely theoretical AI-driven platform he hadn't built yet, but would sell as the future of freight. He would dazzle the investors, charm the clients back, and publicly humiliate Nia if she dared to show her face. He pulled out his phone and dialed Marcus. "Get me a table at the gala," Desmond ordered, his eyes manic in the mirror reflection. "The center table. And get the marketing team in on Sunday. We are going to remind this city who built this industry. I am going all in." The invitation arrived at the Enforce offices on a Tuesday morning, carried by a private courier who looked out of place amidst the hustle of Nia's operations floor. It was a heavy, cream-colored envelope sealed with wax, a relic of a bygone era that Desmond clung to like a lifeline. Inside was a ticket to the Southeastern Logistics Gala, seated at Table 1, Desmond's table. Included was a handwritten note on Peyton Logistics' letterhead, the penmanship aggressive and sweeping. "Nia, let's bury the hatchet. Come see how the big players operate. We have a position open for a director of operations. Come home before you drown." It was a masterclass in manipulation. Desmond wasn't inviting a peer, he was summoning a wayward child. In his delusional narrative, Nia's success was a fluke, a chaotic burst of energy that would soon burn out, leaving her destitute. He believed that if he dangled the glamour of the gala before her eyes, the crystal chandeliers, the endless champagne, the proximity to his own fading power, she would remember her place. He intended to corner her between the appetizer and the main course, offer her an inflated title with no real power, and force her to fix the mess he had created under the guise of a promotion. He wanted her to save his company while he took credit for saving her career. Sarah, standing by Nia's desk, read the note over her shoulder and scoffed. "He is delusional," she said, tossing the heavy card onto the glass desk. "Director of Operations. He wants you to be his maid again. You aren't going, are you?" Nia picked up the card. The cardstock was thick, expensive, and desperate. She ran her thumb over the gold embossing. She imagined Desmond sitting in his office chuckling to himself, thinking he had set the perfect trap. He expected her to either refuse out of fear or show up humble and grateful. He did not understand that the power dynamic had not just shifted, it had inverted. "I am going," Nia said, her voice calm and terrifyingly cold. Sarah looked at her concerned. "Nia, it's an ambush. He's going to try to humiliate you in front of the entire industry. He'll make speeches about loyalty. He'll try to make you look like a traitor." "Let him try," Nia replied, standing up and walking to the window that overlooked the harbor, a view Desmond used to brag about having, which she now owned. "He thinks he is inviting a former assistant to a dinner party. He doesn't realize he is inviting the competition. He wants to show me the big players fine. I will show him what the new game looks like." She turned back to her team, her eyes hard. "RSVP for 2. I'm taking Arthur Sterling as my +1. And Sarah. Get the marketing deck ready. We aren't going there to eat dinner. We are going there to recruit." Desmond thought he was setting a trap to catch a mouse. He had no idea he had just opened the door for a lion. Nia dropped the invitation back onto the desk. It landed with a soft thud, the sound of a gauntlet being picked up. She picked up her phone to call her tailor. If Desmond wanted a show, she would give him one he would never forget. The boutique on Fifth Avenue smelled of expensive leather jasmine and quiet judgment. It was the kind of place where price tags were hidden because if you had to ask, you were in the wrong zip code. Nia walked in with a singular purpose. She was not looking for a safe, black cocktail dress to blend into the shadows. She was looking for war paint. She found it on a mannequin in the center of the room, a floor-length gown of crimson silk structured at the shoulders like armor, yet flowing like liquid fire. It was aggressive, elegant, and impossible to ignore. It was a dress designed for a woman who intended to burn a room down. As Nia stood before the trifold mirror, the tailor pinning the hem to perfection, the front door chimed. The tranquility of the shop was shattered by a high, demanding voice complaining about the humidity. Nia didn't need to turn around to identify the intruder. It was Emily. Desmond's wife breezed into the shop draped in designer logos that screamed new money rather than whispering wealth. She was clearly shopping for the gala, looking for something to cement her status as the queen of Peyton Logistics. When she spotted Nia in the reflection of the mirror, she stopped dead. Her surprise quickly curdled into a sneer of amused pity. "Nia!" Emily laughed, a brittle sound that grated on the nerves. She walked over, looking Nia up and down with exaggerated sympathy. "I didn't know they let the general public in here without an appointment. That color is bold. Are you trying to distract people from the rumors?" Nia watched the tailor finish the last pin. "Hello, Emily. I assume you are shopping for the gala." "Obviously." Emily smirked, flipping her hair. "Desmond is the keynote speaker after all. We have to look the part of a power couple. But you, Desmond, told me about your little situation. It's so sad, really. Trying to run a business from a garage. He said you're barely making rent." Emily leaned in, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper dripping with venom. "Honey, take a little advice from someone who knows the industry. Put that dress back. It costs more than your company is worth. You should be saving your pennies for bankruptcy court, not playing dress-up. It's embarrassing." The tailor stepped back, sensing the tension. Nia didn't flinch. She didn't look embarrassed. She looked at Emily the way a scientist looks at a specimen in a jar. "You really don't know, do you?" Nia asked softly. "Know what?" Emily snapped, annoyed that her insult hadn't drawn blood. Nia turned to the sales associate. "I'll take it. And the shoes. No need to wrap them. Send them to my office at the Skyline Tower." She pulled out a heavy black metal credit card, the kind issued only to high-net-worth business accounts, and handed it over. The chip reader beeped with a satisfyingly instant approval. Nia turned back to Emily, whose eyes were glued to the black card. "Desmond tells you I am bankrupt because he needs you to believe he is still rich," Nia said, stepping closer, her voice cool and dangerously calm. "But I know the books, Emily. I know about the insurance claim denial. I know about the Tech Global lawsuit. And I know about the personal loans he took out to cover payroll last week." Emily's face went slack. "You're lying." "Am I?" Nia smiled, but her eyes were ice. Go ahead and buy your dress, Emily. Max out the cards while they still work. But if I were you, I would keep a little cash in a separate account, not for a rainy day, but for a retainer. Because when Desmond realizes he has lost everything, he is going to need someone to blame. And you are the closest target. You don't need a gala gown, Emily. You need a divorce lawyer. Nia walked past her, the red silk rustling like the wind, before a storm leaving Emily, standing alone in the center of the shop, clutching her purse, the seed of terror finally planted in her heart. The driveway of the Grand Marquis Hotel was a river of polished chrome and camera flashes, the air thick with the humidity of the Atlanta night and the scent of expensive ambition. Desmond arrived first, orchestrating his entrance with the desperate precision of a man trying to convince the world he was still a king. He stepped out of a white stretch limousine, a rental he had put on a personal credit card just hours before, and buttoned his tuxedo jacket. He offered a hand to Emily, who emerged looking brittle and terrified in her overpriced gown, her eyes darting around as if expecting a process server to jump out from behind the velvet ropes. Desmond waved at the photographers, flashing a smile that was all teeth and no warmth. He expected a surge of reporters, a clamor for quotes about his keynote speech. Instead, he got polite, scattered applause and the clicking of a few obligatory shutters. The industry titans standing near the entrance gave him brief nods before returning to their conversations. It was the reception given to a relic, not a ruler. Then the atmosphere changed. The ambient chatter on the red carpet died down, replaced by a sudden electric hush. A matte black luxury sedan distinct among the sea of rented limousines glided to the curb. It wasn't showy, it was lethal. It was the kind of car owned by someone who signs the front of the check, not the back. The valet opened the rear door, and a pair of crimson stilettos hit the pavement. Nia rose from the car, the red silk gown flowing around her like liquid armor. She didn't look like a former assistant, she looked like the owner of the building. But she wasn't alone. Arthur Sterling, the CEO of Tech Global and the most powerful man in the room, stepped out from the other side of the car. He wasn't just escorting her, he was deferring to her. He adjusted his cuff and waited for her to lead the way. The reaction was instantaneous. The gravitational center of the event shifted violently away from Desmond. The reporters who had ignored him surged toward the curb, shouting Nia's name. The venture capitalists who had mocked Desmond on the golf course abandoned their drinks to intercept her path. Frank Miller, the trucking magnate who had crippled Desmond's fleet, walked right past Desmond without even blinking, extending a hand to Nia with a beaming smile. There she is, Frank boomed, his voice carrying over the crowd, the woman who saved my quarter. Desmond stood frozen near the entrance, his hand half raised in a greeting that no one returned. He watched as his former vendors, his jealous competitors, and the clients he had lost formed a protective, admiring ring around Nia. She didn't look for him. She didn't glance his way to gloat. She simply existed in a stratosphere he could no longer reach. She threw her head back and laughed at something Arthur said, the sound confident and free. In that moment, surrounded by the flashing lights, Desmond realized the terrifying truth. He hadn't set a trap for Nia. He had built a stage for her coronation, and he was just a spectator in the cheap seats. The ballroom buzzed with the low hum of expensive conversation, but table 1 was an island of suffocating tension. Desmond had pulled strings with the event coordinator to ensure Nia was seated directly across from him, flanked by his nervous wife and a few silent investors, while Arthur Sterling was conveniently placed at the far end of the table. Desmond wanted Nia isolated. He wanted an audience for his benevolence. As the waiters cleared the appetizers, Desmond leaned over the centerpiece, fixing Nia with a look of practiced paternal pity. "You made quite a splash tonight, Nia," Desmond said, his voice loud enough to command the table's attention. "That dress, it is very bold. A bit aggressive for someone in a support role, don't you think? But I suppose when you don't have actual business to stand on, you have to rely on theatrics." Nia didn't flinch. She picked up her crystal goblet of Pinot Noir, the deep red wine matching her silk gown perfectly. She swirled the liquid slowly, watching the legs run down the glass. I find that in this industry, Desmond, if you don't wear the armor, you get eaten by the wolves. I assume you know a thing or two about wolves lately. Desmond chuckled a dry, dismissive sound. He adjusted his cufflinks, preparing to deliver the killing blow. Always the sharp tongue. Look, let's cut the charade. I know you're drowning. I know Sterling is just using you to drive down my rates. Once he gets what he wants, he will drop you, and you will be left with nothing but debt and a closet full of expensive clothes. He paused for effect, waiting for the fear to register in her eyes. When it didn't, he pressed harder. I am a forgiving man, Nia. I am willing to offer you a lifeline. I have an opening for a senior logistics manager. I am prepared to offer you $100,000 a year. Full benefits after probation. All you have to do is dissolve your little LLC, apologize to Marcus for the disruption, and come home. Don't let your pride bankrupt you. It's the best offer you will ever get. The table went deathly quiet. It was a public undressing, an offer framed as charity designed to strip her of her autonomy. Desmond sat back smug and expectant, waiting for her to break. Nia took a slow, deliberate sip of her wine. She set the glass down with a soft, resonant click that sounded like a judge's gavel. 100,000. Nia repeated, her voice calm and conversational. That is a very specific number, Desmond. It is fascinating that you are offering me a salary that equals exactly the amount of the bridge loan you took out from Citigroup last Thursday. Desmond's smile evaporated. His skin turned a sickly shade of gray. Excuse me. I do my due diligence, Nia said, leaning in, her eyes locking onto his with predatory intensity. I know about the UCC liens filed against your warehouse equipment. I know you leveraged your personal home equity line of credit to cover the payroll this week because the insurance payout for the insulin disaster was denied. And I know that the Peyton Prime software developers walked off the job yesterday because their invoices are 90 days past due. Desmond looked around the table in panic, terrified that the investors were listening. His hands began to shake beneath the tablecloth. You aren't offering me a job because you are generous, Desmond. Nia whispered the truth, cutting through the air like a knife. You are offering me a job because you are insolvent. You don't have $100,000. In fact, if this gala doesn't generate a miracle tonight by Monday morning, the bank is going to lock the doors to your office. I suggest you enjoy the wine, Desmond. It is likely the last premium vintage you will be drinking for a very long time. The silence following Nia's revelation about Desmond's debts was heavy enough to crush bone, but Marcus, seated 2 chairs away, mistook the stunned quiet for an opportunity. He saw his boss withering under Nia's gaze, his face pale and his hands trembling, and his instinct as a sycophant kicked in. He needed to defend the castle even if the walls were already burning. Marcus stood up, adjusting his ill-fitting tuxedo jacket, and raised his voice to a pitch designed to carry over the ambient chatter of the ballroom. It is fascinating to hear you lecture us on finances, Nia, Marcus announced, turning his body so the executives at the neighboring tables, Table 2, occupied by the regional directors of FedEx and UPS, could hear every word. Especially considering the real reason you are no longer with Peyton Logistics. We didn't want to make a scene out of respect for your situation, but since you are throwing stones, perhaps we should be honest. We fired you for gross incompetence. You were drowning, Nia. You couldn't handle the basic software updates. We let you go to save the company from your errors. The accusation hung in the air, ugly and sharp. The chatter at the surrounding tables died instantly. Heads turned. The admiration that had followed Nia's entrance began to curdle into suspicion. This was an industry built on trust and precision. An accusation of incompetence was a professional death sentence. Whispers began to snake through the room like smoke. Is that true? She was fired. Maybe N-Force really is just a house of cards. Desmond looked up, finding a flicker of hope in Marcus's audacity. He straightened his tie, latching onto the lie. Marcus is right, Desmond said, his voice regaining a fraction of its old arrogance as he played to the gallery. We tried to mentor you, Nia. We tried to cover for your mistakes. It breaks my heart to see you pretending to be something you are not. You are a liability, and everyone at this table knows it. Nia did not interrupt. She did not shout. She did not defend herself against the slander. She simply sat there, her posture perfect, her hand resting lightly on the stem of her wineglass. She looked at Marcus with a mixture of boredom and pity, as if a small, noisy dog were barking at a passing train. She caught Arthur Sterling's eye at the end of the table. He was red-faced, ready to stand up and destroy them, but Nia gave him a microscopic shake of her head. Wait. The room was buzzing now, the tide of opinion shifting precariously. Desmond opened his mouth to pile on another lie to bury her while he had the momentum, but the house lights suddenly dimmed to black. A spotlight slashed through the darkness, illuminating the stage at the front of the hall. The whispers were cut off by the booming voice of the master of ceremonies over the PA system. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats," the voice commanded, echoing off the gilded ceiling. "It is time for the highlight of our evening, the presentation of the Southeastern Supply Chain Excellence Awards." Desmond leaned back, a smug smile returning to his face. This was his territory. He had bought the platinum sponsorship package. He expected his name to be called. He looked at Nia in the dim light, his eyes gleaming with malice. "Watch and learn, Nia," he whispered. "This is what real success looks like." "And now," the MC continued, "for our most prestigious honor, the Logistics Innovator of the Year Award. This year, the committee has chosen a recipient who has single-handedly redefined crisis management and efficiency in the modern era." Nia turned to face the stage, a small, knowing smile touching her lips. The silence was her weapon, and she was about to let the room speak for her. The ballroom held its breath as the master of ceremonies paused for dramatic effect, the spotlight cutting a cone of silence through the dark. Desmond Peyton adjusted his silk lapels, his chest swelling with the preemptive pride of a man who believes he has bought the outcome. He knew how these things worked. He had sponsored the champagne toast. He had golfed with the committee chairman. The award for Logistics Innovator of the Year was not just a trophy, it was the shield he needed to deflect the arrows of bankruptcy. "This year's winner," the MC's voice boomed rich and reverberating, "is a leader who rose from the ashes of a chaotic market. When global supply chains fractured, this individual did not offer excuses, they offered solutions. They took a crumbling infrastructure and rebuilt it into a powerhouse of efficiency in less than 6 months." Desmond smiled, a reflex of pure ego. He heard the words rebuilt and powerhouse and saw only his own reflection. He believed his theoretical Peyton Prime software was the innovation being honored. He was so certain of his victory, so blinded by his need for validation, that he did not wait for the name. As the MC drew breath for the reveal, Desmond stood up. He rose slowly, buttoning his tuxedo jacket with a flourish, nodding graciously to the confused investors at his table. He turned slightly, raising a hand to acknowledge the applause he was certain would follow. He looked down at Nia, his eyes gleaming with a toxic mix of pity and triumph, silently telling her to watch how a king accepts his crown. "Ladies and gentlemen," the MC shouted, "for her miraculous turnaround of the tech global crisis and her unprecedented growth in the sector, the award goes to—" Desmond took a step toward the stage. "N-Force Logistics and its CEO, Nia." The name cracked through the air like a whip. For a heartbeat, time stopped. Desmond froze mid-step, his hand half raised in a wave that now looked like a spasm. The smile died on his face, replaced by a slack-jawed mask of incomprehension. He blinked, waiting for the correction, waiting for the MC to apologize and read the right name. But the correction never came. Instead, the room exploded. A thunderous roar of applause erupted. Not polite golf claps, but genuine raucous cheering from the back tables where the truckers and the vendors sat, the people Nia had paid on time. The spotlight swung violently away from Desmond, leaving him stranded in the semi-darkness and locked onto the woman in the red dress sitting across from him. Nia did not rush. She placed her wineglass down with deliberate calm. She stood up, the crimson silk of her gown catching the light like a flame. She looked at Desmond, who was still standing, a statue of humiliation blocking her path. "Excuse me, Desmond," Nia said, her voice cutting through the applause at their table. "You are in my way." Desmond looked around. He saw the eyes of the industry titans staring at him. He saw the pity in the eyes of his wife. He saw Marcus hiding his face. He realized with a sickening lurch that he was the only person standing who hadn't won anything. He was a man crashing a coronation. He stumbled back, his legs hitting the chair, collapsing into his seat with a lack of grace that shook the table. He sat there, small and gray, as Nia glided past him, ascending the stairs to the stage, to accept the trophy that was supposed to save his life. The applause was deafening, but all Desmond could hear was the sound of his own empire crumbling. The walk from table 1 to the podium was less than 50 feet, but for Nia it spanned 5 years of struggle. She moved through the spotlight with the grace of a predator, the crimson silk of her gown trailing behind her like a royal train. Every eye in the room was fixed on her. The whispers had ceased, replaced by a heavy, expectant silence. She did not look back at the wreckage of Desmond's ego. She looked only forward toward the microphone that gleamed like a scepter. Suddenly a voice cracked through the silence, high-pitched and desperate. "This is a mistake." It was Marcus. He had scrambled to his feet, his face slick with sweat, pointing a shaking finger at the stage. The desperation in his voice was palpable. He knew that if Desmond fell, he would be buried in the rubble. "She is a fraud," Marcus screamed, his voice echoing awkwardly off the high ceilings. "She operates out of a garage. She stole our proprietary data. This award belongs to Desmond Payton." The room gasped. A few security guards stepped forward, hands hovering over their radios. Desmond didn't move to stop him. He just sat there, head bowed, hoping Marcus's hysteria might somehow change reality. Nia stopped. She didn't flinch. She didn't shout back. She simply reached the podium, gripped the sides with steady hands, and leaned into the microphone. The feedback whine cut through the room, silencing Marcus instantly. "Let him speak," Nia said, her voice amplified and calm, booming through the speakers. "Fear makes people loud. Competence makes people quiet." She looked up at the projection booth at the back of the hall and gave a curt nod. "Cue the deck, please." Behind her, the massive LED screen that spanned the width of the stage flickered to life. It didn't show a logo. It didn't show a headshot. It showed data. A line graph appeared glowing in stark white against a black background. It started at 0 in January. By June, it had shot upward in a near-vertical trajectory, piercing the top of the chart. "What you are looking at," Nia said, turning slightly to gesture at the screen, "is a 400% increase in shipping efficiency for Tech Global's North American sector in 6 months. The screen changed. A list of names scrolled down: Frank Miller, Trucking Horizon Air Freight, Pacific Packaging. These are the vendors who were on the brink of bankruptcy because they weren't being paid. Nia continued, her eyes scanning the room, locking onto the vendors at the back tables. "My company, Enforce, paid every invoice within 48 hours. We didn't just move boxes, we stabilized the local economy." The screen changed one last time. It showed a side-by-side comparison. On the left was Payton Logistics' red arrows pointing down: missed deadlines, insurance claims denied. On the right was Enforce green arrows: 0, lost cargo, record-breaking speed. "Mr. Payton's associate calls this fraud," Nia said, looking directly at Marcus, who was now shrinking back into his chair. "The market calls it a correction. Innovation isn't about who has the biggest office or the loudest voice. It is about who gets the job done when the lights go out. And while some people were buying champagne, they couldn't afford my team was working." She turned back to the audience, a sea of stunned faces, illuminated by the glow of her success. "I accept this award," Nia said, her voice ringing with finality. "Not for myself, but for every person who was told they were redundant, only to prove they were the engine." The applause had barely faded when Nia raised her hand, silencing the room, not with a demand but with the quiet authority of someone who now owned the floor. She shifted her stance behind the podium, her red dress a stark contrast against the black backdrop of the stage. "Before I step down," Nia said, her voice steady and clear, "I must acknowledge the partners who made this growth possible. No logistics company exists in a vacuum. We are only as strong as the clients who trust us with their livelihoods." She clicked the small remote in her hand. The screen behind her shifted from the stark growth graphs to a rolling list of corporate logos and company names under the heading Current Strategic Partners. The room went quiet, then a ripple of shock moved through the crowd like a physical wave. It started at the back tables and surged forward to the VIP section. The names scrolling on the screen were not obscure startups or small local vendors. They were titans: Apex Pharmaceuticals, Southern Steel and Alloy, the Fresh Market Group, Horizon Electronics. At table 1, Desmond squinted at the screen, his brain refusing to process the visual data. His breath hitched in his throat. He knew these logos. He had framed contracts with these companies hanging in his lobby. He had played golf with their VPs. He had sent them expensive gift baskets every Christmas for a decade. Just last week, Marcus had told him that Southern Steel was reducing volume due to market fluctuations. Jamal had reported that Apex was temporarily pausing shipments for inventory counts. They hadn't paused. They had moved. Desmond watched in horror as 90% of his client list scrolled past on the massive LED screen, publicly declaring their allegiance to Enforce. He wasn't looking at a competitor's success. He was looking at his own obituary written in bold Helvetica font. He turned to Marcus, his eyes wide and unseeing his face a mask of betrayal. Marcus refused to look back, staring intently at his shoes, the lies he had fed Desmond about market conditions evaporating under the harsh light of the projector. The murmurs in the ballroom grew louder, turning into a low roar of realization. The industry insiders did the math instantly. They realized Peyton Logistics was not just struggling, it was a shell company. It was a ghost ship sailing on momentum completely hollowed out from the inside. Desmond didn't just lose Tech Global, he had lost the herd. Nia watched Desmond's realization from the stage. She saw the moment the light went out behind his eyes. She saw the exact second he understood that he was the captain of a sunken vessel. She leaned into the microphone one last time, delivering the final truth. "Many of these partners came to us in the last 3 months," Nia said, her voice compassionate yet devastatingly clear. "They came because they needed reliability. They stayed because we treat their business as if it were our own. To everyone on this list, thank you for trusting Enforce to carry your legacy." She didn't need to say Desmond's name. The room did it for her. Every eye shifted from the triumphant woman on stage to the small, shrinking man at the center table. Desmond Peyton sat amidst the wreckage of his own arrogance, realizing that while he was busy buying a rental tuxedo for his victory lap, Nia had quietly bought the track. He had nothing left to sell, no one to ship for, and nowhere to hide. Nia waited for the murmurs over the client list to settle into a hushed anticipation. She did not step away from the podium. She had one final ledger to balance. She looked down at table 1, locking eyes with Desmond, then shifted her gaze slightly to the woman sitting beside him, her own mother, Catherine, who had chosen the illusion of Desmond's power over her daughter's reality. "People have asked me how Enforce grew so fast," Nia said, her voice dropping to a conversational, intimate register that drew the audience in. "They ask for my secret, and I have to give credit where it is due. I have to thank my former employer, Desmond Peyton." Desmond looked up, blinking, a flicker of confused hope crossing his face. Was she going to offer an olive branch? Was this a mercy killing? "Desmond taught me the most important lesson of my career on my first day at Peyton Logistics," Nia continued. "He sat me down, looked at the payroll budget, and told me, 'Nia, never forget that in this industry women are an expense, men are an asset. Female ambition is just overhead that costs too much to insure.'" A low, uncomfortable gasp rippled through the room. A few female executives at the front tables stiffened their eyes, narrowing at Desmond. "I took that advice to heart," Nia said, a sharp, dangerous smile cutting across her face. When I started my own company, I was very concerned about overhead. I looked at the market. I looked at the talent pool. And I realized Desmond was right about one thing. Incompetence is expensive. Arrogance is a liability. And the most expensive thing in the world is a man who thinks he knows everything but can't remember to sign a contract. She leaned forward, gripping the podium. So I cut the costs. I didn't hire men who lose refrigerated containers in the desert because they think checklists are beneath them. I didn't hire men who treat their vendors like servants. I built a leadership team of people who know that overhead is just a word weak men use to describe women who are smarter than them. The delay was less than a second. Then a single laugh barked out from the back of the room, Frank Miller. It was contagious. The laughter rolled forward like a tide crashing over the VIP tables. It wasn't polite amusement. It was the release of years of industry frustration with Desmond's ego. The room wasn't just laughing with Nia. They were laughing at Desmond. At table 1, the humiliation was total. Desmond sank into his chair, his face a mask of purple rage and shame. Emily covered her face with her hand, shielding herself from the cameras. And Nia's mother, Catherine, stared at her daughter on the stage, finally seeing the titan she had bet against. She looked at Desmond, the man she thought was a king, and saw a jester. She looked at the daughter she had called a failure and saw the queen. The shame burned her throat like acid. Nia didn't wait for the laughter to die down. She picked up her award, turned her back on her former life, and walked off the stage to the sound of an empire crashing down behind her. The heavy velvet curtains swung shut behind Nia, muffling the roar of the applause into a dull, distant thrum. The backstage corridor was cool and dimly lit, a stark contrast to the blinding lights of the stage. Nia exhaled, her shoulders dropping an inch, the adrenaline beginning to settle into a deep, vibrating sense of accomplishment. She adjusted the heavy crystal trophy in her arm, preparing to find the exit, but her path was blocked by a shadow that detached itself from the wall. It was Desmond. He looked like a man who had been physically beaten. His tuxedo was disheveled, his tie crooked, and his face was slick with a sheen of cold sweat. But his eyes were wild, burning with the manic energy of a cornered animal. "You thief!" Desmond hissed, stepping into her personal space, his finger shaking as he pointed it at her face. "You ungrateful, manipulative thief! You didn't win that award, you stole it. You stole my client list. You stole my vendors. You stood on that stage and bragged about building an empire, but you built it with my bricks." Nia didn't step back. She looked at him with a calm, detached curiosity. "I didn't steal your bricks, Desmond. You threw them away. I just picked them up." "Liar!" Desmond shouted, his voice cracking, echoing dangerously in the narrow hall. "You seduced Sterling. You offered him kickbacks. That is the only explanation. Tech Global doesn't leave a legacy partner for a garage startup unless money is changing hands under the table. I am going to report you to the SEC. I am going to have you audited until you bleed." "That won't be necessary, Desmond." The voice came from behind Nia, deep and resonant. Arthur Sterling stepped out of the shadows of the wings, flanked by 2 security guards. He didn't look at Nia. His cold, steel-gray gaze was fixed entirely on Desmond. Desmond flinched, his bluster evaporating instantly in the presence of the billionaire. "Arthur, She manipulated the data. You have to see that. She tricked you." "Nia didn't trick anyone," Sterling said, walking past Nia to stand toe-to-toe with Desmond. "And she didn't steal Tech Global. We left voluntarily. We ran for the lifeboats because the captain was asleep at the wheel." "That was a temporary glitch," Desmond pleaded, his hands held up in surrender. "My team was handling it." "Your team was the problem," Sterling spat, his voice dripping with disdain. "You fired the only person who knew how the system worked, and you replaced her with Jamal, your son." The revelation hung in the air. Nia's eyes widened slightly. She had always suspected nepotism, but Desmond had hidden the relation well. "You thought you could put your incompetent, lazy son in a director's chair just because he shares your DNA?" Sterling continued, his voice rising. "He didn't just lose a shipment, Desmond. He lied to my logistics officers. He tried to cover up a level 5 breach with a fake manifest. Naya didn't steal your contract. Your son burned it, and you handed him the matches. Desmond opened his mouth, but no sound came out. The truth was a physical weight crushing him. He couldn't blame Nia. He couldn't blame the market. He was destroyed by his own arrogance and his blind loyalty to a son who had inherited his incompetence, but none of his cunning. "Get out of my way," Sterling commanded. Desmond stumbled back against the wall, shrinking into the shadows. Sterling offered his arm to Naya. "Shall we CEO Peyton?" Sterling asked. "We shall," Nia replied. They walked down the corridor, leaving Desmond alone in the dark, clutching his chest, listening to the sound of his own heart breaking. The morning sun did not bring hope to Peyton Logistics. It brought the executioners. The hangover from the gala had barely faded when the fleet of black SUVs pulled up to the glass tower. These were not clients or vendors. They were auditors from Citigroup and federal marshals. Desmond arrived at 9:00 a.m., his tuxedo from the night before crumpled in the back seat of his car. He walked to the front doors, expecting to do damage control, but when he swiped his access card, the light flashed a harsh, unforgiving red. He tried again. Red. The glass doors slid open, but not for him. Mr. Henderson, the senior loan officer from the bank, stepped out, flanked by 2 armed security guards. He held a clipboard that looked like a tombstone. "Your access has been revoked, Mr. Peyton," Henderson said, his voice devoid of sympathy. "The bridge loan you secured against your personal assets defaulted at midnight. We are exercising our right to immediate foreclosure. The building, the equipment, and the remaining accounts are now the property of the bank." Desmond stood paralyzed on the sidewalk. "You can't do this. I have a plan. I just need a week." "You don't have a week," Henderson replied. "And frankly, bankruptcy is the least of your problems." Behind Henderson, the lobby was a scene of organized chaos. Auditors were seizing computers and boxing up files. In the center of the storm stood Emily, Desmond's wife. She was arguing with a forensic accountant, her voice shrill and panicked. She was clutching her designer handbag as if it contained the crown jewels. "I am the owner's wife!" Emily screamed. "I have a right to the corporate expense account. It was for marketing." "It was embezzlement, Mrs. Peyton," the accountant stated loudly enough for the marshals to hear. "We tracked the rebranding funds. You siphoned $200,000 into a shell account under your maiden name to pay for your personal debts and that gala. That is not marketing. That is grand larceny." Emily's face crumbled. The marshal stepped forward, and for the first time in her life, the gold bracelets on her wrists were replaced by steel handcuffs. She looked at Desmond, pleading for him to save her, but he couldn't even save himself. Then came Marcus. He tried to slip out the side exit carrying a shredder bin, but he was intercepted by a federal agent. The agent wasn't interested in money, he was holding a stack of customs declarations. "Marcus Vance," the agent asked. "We have digital signatures linking you to the falsified insurance claims regarding the pharmaceutical shipment. You knowingly filed fraudulent documents to cover up gross negligence. That is insurance fraud and a federal felony." Marcus dropped the bin. "I was just following orders. Desmond told me to fix it." "Save it for the judge," the agent said, spinning him around. Desmond watched as his wife was led into one police cruiser and his right-hand man into another. His empire hadn't just been seized. It had been dissected, revealing the rot at its core. He stood alone on the pavement, the glass tower reflecting his ruin, realizing that the check for his arrogance had finally cleared, and the cost was everything he had. The loyalty purchased with stolen money evaporated the moment the handcuffs clicked shut. As the federal agents guided Emily toward the patrol car, the facade of the supportive wife shattered completely. She didn't look at Marcus, who was already weeping in the back of another vehicle. She looked at Desmond, her eyes filled with a venomous hatred. "I am filing for divorce today," Emily shrieked, struggling against the agent's grip. "You told me it was handled. You told me we were safe. You are a failure, Desmond. A bankrupt, useless failure." The car door slammed, cutting off her tirade, but the silence that followed was worse. Desmond turned, looking for his son, looking for anyone. He saw Jamal's sports car idling at the edge of the lot. For a second, their eyes met. Jamal didn't offer help. He didn't offer comfort. He saw a sinking ship and he ran. He revved the engine, merged into traffic, and sped away, leaving his father to face the ruin alone. Jamal blocked his father's number before he even hit the highway. Desmond stood alone on the sidewalk, the morning heat beating down on him. The weight of it all, the bankruptcy, the humiliation, the abandonment, suddenly became physical. A crushing pressure gripped his chest, like a vice tightening around his heart. His vision blurred. He gasped for air that wouldn't come. He collapsed to the concrete, clutching his chest, the towering glass building above him, spinning into darkness. An hour later, in the climate-controlled quiet of the N-Force CEO office, Nia's private line rang. It was her mother, Catherine. Nia answered on the second ring. She didn't speak. She just listened. "Nia, please!" Catherine sobbed, her voice unrecognizable through the hysteria. "It's your father. He had a massive heart attack. We are at Mercy General. He is in critical condition. He keeps asking for you. Please, Nia. We have no one else. The accounts are frozen. The lawyers are gone. You have to come. You have to save us." Nia held the phone away from her ear, looking out at the harbor, her face unreadable. The woman who had called her a failure was now begging for a savior. The circle was complete. The antiseptic smell of Mercy General's cardiac unit was a sharp contrast to the expensive cologne that usually heralded Desmond Payton's presence. Now, the titan of industry lay connected to a web of tubes and wires, his skin the color of old parchment. The heart attack hadn't killed him, but the reality of his ruin was finishing the job. Catherine sat by the bedside, her eyes red-rimmed, clutching her purse as if it were the last life raft on the Titanic. When Nia walked in, the room went silent, save for the rhythmic beeping of the monitor. Nia didn't bring flowers. She brought a legal portfolio. She stood at the foot of the bed, looking at the man who had taught her that family was just another word for leverage. "You called," Nia said, her voice devoid of warmth. "I am here." "Nia," Desmond rasped, his voice weak, stripped of its booming arrogance. "They took everything. The bank, Emily. It's all gone." "I know," Nia replied. "And by tomorrow morning, the creditors will start seizing personal assets. Your house, your car, this pension you thought was safe. It is all collateral damage." Catherine sobbed quietly. "We have nothing, Nia. Please, we are your parents." "You are my biological predecessors," Nia corrected calmly. "But I am not here to argue semantics. I am here to make a business transaction." She opened the portfolio and placed a contract on the tray table. "Payton Logistics is dead," Nia stated, "but the brand still has legacy value in certain secondary markets. N-Force is willing to acquire the remaining intellectual property, the brand name, and the residual client data. The purchase price is exactly enough to cover your medical bills, pay off the immediate IRS liens, and leave you with a modest retirement fund. It will keep you out of prison for fraud, and it will keep you off the street." Desmond stared at the contract. It was a pittance compared to what his company was worth a month ago, but it was a fortune compared to the zero he currently had. "You are buying my name," he whispered. "I am buying my peace," Nia said. "But there are conditions. Clause 4. You liquidate all remaining assets. Clause 5. You and Catherine leave Atlanta permanently. You move to a retirement community in Florida and you stay there. You do not give interviews. You do not consult. You vanish." Desmond looked at Nia. He looked for the scared assistant he had fired. She was gone. In her place was a CEO who negotiated with the ruthlessness he had always wished for his son. "And if I refuse?" Desmond asked weakly. "Then I walk out that door," Nia said, snapping the portfolio shut. "And the bank takes the rest." Desmond's hand shook as he reached for the pen. It was the hardest signature of his life. He wasn't just signing away a company. He was signing his surrender. He scrawled his name, the letters jagged and broken. Nia took the paper. She didn't gloat. She didn't smile. Goodbye, Desmond, she said. She turned and walked out of the hospital room, leaving her parents to their survival, and stepping back into a world she now ruled. The plastic casing of the cheap hospital pen creaked under Desmond's grip. His hand hovered over the signature line, trembling not just from the aftershocks of cardiac arrest, but from the sheer crushing weight of his ego collapsing. To him, this was not a business transaction. It was an amputation. He was cutting off the limb that defined his existence. He looked up at Nia one last time, searching her face for a glimmer of the submissive assistant he used to order around. He looked for the girl who used to apologize for his mistakes. He found only a stranger in a tailored suit, a woman who looked at him with the dispassionate gaze of an auditor closing a ledger. "I never thought you had the stomach for it." Desmond wheezed, the ink finally touching the paper. "I thought you were too soft, too emotional." "I learned from the best," Nia replied, her voice flat. "You taught me that mercy is a luxury expenses usually cannot afford." Desmond scrawled his name. The signature was jagged, a shadow of the flamboyant autograph that used to adorn his company checks. He dropped the pen. It clattered onto the plastic tray table, the sound loud in the silent room. "I am sorry," Desmond whispered. Nia paused. For a second, the air in the room grew heavy. Was this it? Was this the moment of redemption? "I am sorry I didn't see the killer in you earlier." Desmond continued, staring at the ceiling. "If I had known you could be this ruthless, I would have made you a partner. I lost because I thought you were weak. That was my only mistake." Nia felt the last tether snap. He wasn't sorry for the abuse. He wasn't sorry for the theft of her ideas or the humiliation. He was only sorry that he had miscalculated his opponent. He respected her now, but only because she held the knife. "You still don't get it," Nia said, picking up the contract and sliding it into her briefcase. "You didn't lose because you underestimated me, Desmond. You lost because you underestimated everyone. You thought you could build a kingdom on the backs of people you despised. That isn't business. That is gravity, and gravity always wins." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a cashier's check. It was a substantial sum, enough to pay off the debts and buy a quiet life in Florida, but it was a fraction of the fortune he had squandered. She placed it on the bedside table next to a cup of tepid water. "This is for the movers," Nia said. "Be out of the city by the 1st of the month." She turned on her heel. She walked out of the room, her footsteps echoing down the sterile hallway. She didn't look back at her mother sobbing in the chair. She didn't look back at the broken man in the bed. She walked through the automatic doors of the hospital and stepped into the blinding Atlanta sun. The air tasted sweet. It tasted like ownership. The office no longer smelled of stale scotch and desperation. It smelled of fresh paint and possibilities. Nia stood before the floor-to-ceiling glass wall, looking down at the sprawling grid of Atlanta. This was the view Desmond had hoarded like a dragon guarding gold, the vantage point he claimed belonged only to kings. Now the heavy mahogany desk was gone, replaced by a sleek, minimalist surface of white oak. The dark, oppressive curtains had been ripped down to let the light flood in. Even the name on the door had changed: Enforce Global. It wasn't just a renovation, it was an exorcism. Below her, the city pulsed with the frenetic energy of commerce, 1,000 trucks moving 1,000,000 boxes, many of them orchestrated by the team she had built. The floor outside her office hummed with a different kind of energy now. There was no screaming, no panic, no fear. Just the quiet, lethal efficiency of professionals who knew they were valued. Sarah was running the European desk. Frank Miller was coordinating a new fleet of electric trucks. The ecosystem was thriving because the rot had been cut out. The secure line on her desk chirped a soft digital trill that signaled a priority call. Nia turned away from the view. She walked to the desk, her heels clicking rhythmically against the polished concrete floor. She glanced at the caller ID. It was a country code she hadn't worked with yet: Shanghai. It wasn't a problem. It was the next frontier. A new international conglomerate looking for a partner who could handle the impossible. She didn't hesitate. There was no imposter syndrome left, no voice in her head telling her she was just an assistant playing dress-up. That voice had been silenced the moment she watched Desmond sign his surrender. She picked up the phone, her hand steady her reflection in the glass, looking back at her with eyes that had seen the bottom and climbed all the way to the top. "This is Nia," she said, a smile touching her lips as she prepared to conquer the world. "Let's get to work." Nia's journey teaches us that arrogance is the most expensive liability in business, while competence is the ultimate asset. Desmond believed his power lay in his title, but he learned too late that his empire was built on the skills of the people he mistreated. When Nia walked away, she didn't just leave a job, she bet on herself. Her success proves that true value cannot be silenced or stolen. If you are the smartest person in the room but are treated like an expense, it is time to build your own room. Gravity always wins, and so does talent. If you are ready to bet on yourself, hit subscribe and share this story with someone who needs to hear it.